too. You know, so many of us everywhere, and certainly in the Bay Area, come from such a rich heritage. I'm sure many of you have heard stories about grandparents and great-grandparents and ancestors who helped build the railroad or who came from another country and brought their culture with them. I mean, I wonder how many of you here grew up with photographs on the mantle, even of relatives perhaps you didn't know but heard stories about. Did any of you grow up in that kind of an environment where there were ancestors, people who came before you? Well, I didn't. As far as I knew, I had no ancestors and no people who came before me. And although you might think logically I knew, but the real honest truth is that was not my experience. There were no grandparents, there were no names, there were no relatives who came before me. And my mother contributed to that, and the book is mostly about my mother, so I will focus on her. Both my mother and father were born and raised in Germany, and I think they had decent lives there. And what I knew is they both were lucky to get out early. That's what I knew. And the more I learned, I see they were very fortunate to get out of Germany early enough so they didn't see the worst of what came later. But they didn't talk about it, and I'll tell you a little story about my mother that really tells it all. When I was 8 and my father died, I would say to me that was sudden, and to my mother it evoked or re-evoked the trauma of any other losses she may have had, because I know at that point my life changed radically. But my mother was fortunate because some German Jewish immigrants with an import-export company gave her a job in Manhattan. We were living more on the end of the subway line in Queens, but they gave her a kind of secretarial job, which, knowing my mother, I can guarantee you she wasn't good at and was arrogant about to boot, sort of feeling like it was beneath her dignity to talk about apple cutters and kitchen devices, but she was raised in a different environment. But she would do what she had to do to survive. That was my mother, and she rode the New York subway every day. And she liked to read novels. So she'd ride the subway, even if it was really packed. She often found a way to squeeze in and, you know, have a little bit of a fantasy world, turn the page, read her story, and after she finished each page, she tore it out. Went on to the next page. To the horror. I mean, I think she put it in her pocket and didn't just litter. But she wanted to make it lighter to carry. And I think that's really very symbolic of her life and the way she tore out each page of her life, hoping that it would somehow make her burdens lighter, hoping that she could start each day on a new page. So I appreciate what she had to do, but we're understanding more and more that there's a big gap. And even if the past is painful, and even if you hope that your children and those who follow will have a brighter future, not telling them about your past leaves them with a big hole for imagination to fill in. And I don't know how your imagination works, but mine can turn pretty negative when I don't know what happened and when I have a feeling maybe I wouldn't want to know. So let me tell you what I did know about my mother. I knew she was raised in Leipzig, Germany. I knew she came from a rich family. Every now and then there was a special occasion, like my brother's bar mitzvah, and my mother would go to the safe deposit box she kept somewhere, and she would get out this gold chain, and I remember her saying once, this was her father's watch fob. So now you know what I know about my grandfather, or what I knew. And she'd get out this ring I'm wearing today with 2 rows of diamonds and a row of sapphires and she said, I designed this ring myself for my 16th birthday. And I said, Mom, that's beautiful, what a lovely ring. And she said, come on, cross the street, we have errands to do. And then it went back in the safe deposit box. And that too is symbolic of her story and how they were tucked away in a safe deposit box. I don't know if it was because she thought those stories and this ring belonged to a life not her own anymore. I think probably later in life, if I had pressed her, she would have been happy to tell me a little bit more, at least the good stuff, and I found a lot of the good stuff. But she didn't talk about the past. And then came this event that Johanna referred to in 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And Michael, my husband, and I watched it on TV. Do any of you remember that moment? The shouting of the students, the excitement, the exhilaration in the streets. It just gave me shivers. Even thinking about it now, I can feel the tears behind my eyes. And yet I thought to myself, who am I cheering for? These are the Germans. These are the people that took away my mother's home and her past. And in fact, there was only one other story my mother told me about Germany. And I'm going to read you a little bit of it now. And it came to my mind after that night when I saw the fall of the Berlin Wall.